ko te tihi o kahukura te maunga, ko oka waho te awa, no o tautahi ahau, no Chapani tōku papa, no Tiamani tōku mama. He kai ako ahau ki te kura o Hatumaka, ko Christy, Yonatani, tōku ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So, yeah. Minasan, ohayou gozaimasu, guten tag. The reason I say where my parents are from is just because I wasn't born in New Zealand, and that to me harks back to all of this Japanese and German side, and it's all a bit crazy, but I did grow up in Christchurch. My dad's a painter, that's actually one of his bits of artwork of the Port Hills, the Castle Rock, and that's the view from my window that I grew up with. That was sort of forever changed after the quake, but that's really where I feel grounded, so that's me. I'm incredibly lucky to be a New Zealand Study Award recipient. So the Ministry of Education is currently paying for me to study at Massey, and that is with Deb Wilson, who is also the CEO of New Zealand Gifted Education Centre, which does Mind Plus. Last year I was studying with Rosemary Cathcart with Reach, Linda Silverman, I just love her work. And it was really April who put me on this path. She kind of gave me a bit of a nudge and was like, I think you might enjoy this. And I just wanted to acknowledge that our school is so fortunate to have not just April, but also the board who back PLD and teachers' interests and, you know, care about gifted education at St Mark's. This is Pippa Young, who now teaches at Rangi, but she was my kaiako way back in the 90s in Alma Normal School, where I got a bit of a taste of this one-day school thing from a student's perspective. So, Tukuna kia Rere. Just out of curiosity, does anyone know what this means? Because a lot of us have some te reo, but this isn't a phrase I'd ever heard before. So this is what the ministry is calling their TKI Gifted Learners site, and Tukuna kia Rere is, I'm not sure if it's a whakatauki or just a phrase, but it's to do with let it flow. So the river that wants to run and rush, the running water, it's just releasing everything, the freedom to, you know, get going. And this is the Waimakariri. And what I love about this image is that, you know, why water is so precious in so many ways. And maybe the river is faster than the lake, you know, but the lake is deeper. Doesn't mean the river's better than the lake. It's just there's so many different ways we can value water. And I like that Tukuna kia Rere saying, like, this is what these learners need. It's what they want. It's what they thrive on. It's just let them, you know, let them free, let them go at their own pace, do that kind of thing. So yeah, giftedness, tukuna kia Rere. It's about who you are, not what you do. And you may have heard in the past it used to be G&T. So I didn't really want that job title, kind of gives the wrong connotations. GATE, so the acronym Gifted and Talented Education. You'll still hear that around sometimes. And now they're really starting to talk about gifted, which is bringing kind of the kids back to the foreground, because it's the gifted learners that matter. It's not so much, you know, what are the talents, what can they achieve, this achievement-driven thing, but who is this learner? What is it like for them to be gifted? And for anyone who has this feeling about their children, it's a 24/7 thing. It's not something that they grow out of. It's something you can spot really early on. And for them to be in a mainstream school environment all of the time, if they're really gifted, is really, I suppose, stunting their growth. It's making things really difficult for them. So yeah, gifted learners are intense. The gifted are too everything, too sensitive, too intense, too driven, too honest, too idealistic, too moral, too perfectionistic, too much for other people. Does that sort of resonate with anyone else? Yeah. In the past, I gather that there's been sort of, I think of kind of schools in general, a bit of a concern among parents that, oh, I don't want to be that pushy parent, or, you know, experiences I've heard about where they just want to celebrate their child's success, or that they've reached this milestone, but among their friends it feels like bragging, and that it's just kind of awkward because they're reaching those milestones so much earlier than their age peers. So that intensity is a big part of being gifted. And these are 5 kinds of intensity. The Dabrowski's overexcitabilities, if you want to get technical about it. But my mods kids helped me talk about them yesterday. Just quick play.
Psychomo Huta is an intensity that makes you very, very active and fiddly. You know, it makes it so through that, well, a lot of the stuff you do will be very speedy and hasty. You'll also be very hyper a lot of the time. An example, and you'll talk a lot. An example of this with me is that I talk a lot, and by a lot I mean like way too much. I'm currently fiddling with some beanbag beans, which are on the ground.
And off he goes. So that's the slowest I've ever heard that student talk. That's making a really deliberate effort to be clear and slow, because usually in mods all day long, million miles an hour, a question about this and a question about that and what's going on, and he is classic psychomotor in terms of just talk. I've got other kids as well who just cannot sit still. And in a mainstream traditional classroom environment, just like you're here now sitting still, that is just, it's asking the world of them. That's so hard, and they're wasting all of their energy and effort just trying to sit still, and then we're asking for learning to happen. So psychomotor intensity can be pretty full on. And these are the kids as well who often teachers might find kind of tricky, you know, oh, you've got so-and-so in your class, you know, good luck. Because it's hard work. And that means also that it's especially hard work for parents too. That level of energy and intensity, I think, could probably be really draining. Sensory?
Sensory is where some people just really hate how things feel. Like, an example is that some people like slime and like how it feels, whereas with me, I absolutely despise it. And even worse, it's oobleek. It's horrible. It feels like, ugh, it's just not nice, oobleek. I just really dislike it. Which is just an example of sensory stuff.
So this can come across as picky eating, textures of clothing, so parents cutting tags out of the clothes because it's so scratchy or it itches or it hurts, and like, it can't be that bad, but for them it is that bad, you know. So this is the kid who, while you're out on duty, comes up with a paper cut and is just mortally wounded, but they're feeling it really intensely because all of their senses, you know, their hearing, their vision, everything is just, you know, the classroom is too bright, it's too loud, and it's just sort of overwhelming when that sensory input can be quite intense. And not all kids have all of these, just, you know, to be clear, but probably every gifted kid I've worked with or I've known to be diagnosed as gifted has had at least some of these. Emotional, the student preferred to write. I'll read it out loud, so feel free to read. I have emotional intensity whenever I watch movies where something heartbreaking happens to a character, like an old man never seeing his grandchildren. It always makes me feel very sad. Or when I'm in a rush, I get quite anxious, which doesn't help in the situation. Emotional intensity is where you have many different moods, and a lot of them are exaggerated a lot. It's where you feel certain things more than others do, you know? So these are the students who maybe when they have a rough morning, it's floods of tears and can't go to school, or when they're angry, you know, oh, I suck at everything, I hate this, and it can be quite physical. It's just the emotional range is just really cranked up sometimes. We've got imaginational.
So imaginational is when you have quite a broad imagination. For example, if you're reading a book, you can take yourself and you can put yourself inside the story and like see everything that's going on in the story in your head. Or for another example, like me, I can't sleep facing the wall because I'm scared somebody's going to come into my room. See, I imagine that, but it won't actually happen. It might sound very unfortunate. But, and another one is if you're reading a scary story and then you can't sleep, or you get nightmares because of the scary story. You're imagining that it's going to happen.
So it took me a while to get that little explanation, because often as well, these kids are very introverted. So sometimes particularly some of the shy kids are so quiet, so sort of self-contained in a way because their inner world is so rich. You know, I know some of these kids, and they could make friends if they want to, it's not a lack of social skills, but they're actually genuinely preferring to just sit by themselves at lunchtime reading a book because they're so in that world, and to them that's like a movie or a VR experience where they're really in the book. And some of the kids I work with as well, with this imaginational type intensity that, you know, sometimes they don't get things done. And I said, oh, I was really hoping you'd explain this because I know this is true for you. Were you just sort of busy daydreaming? Yeah, you know, yes, Miss Y, grin, and that's their world and that's where they're at. And then intellectual intensity. I deliberately put this last because I think people who don't know about giftedness often think that this is all that it is, and this is part of it for sure. I apologise for the spelling, it's not something we're working on lots that much. So intellectual intensity is when people give extreme curiosity and are very intrigued in learning new things. In mods, this is obviously something that a lot of people have because this is basically what we think about in order to achieve things. I think this one probably applies to me the most because the other intensities don't really match my personality. And this is from someone who I think could really easily slip under the radar. You know, there are some gifted kids where you're just like, oh wow, something's going on here. But there are others, and the research shows us, as it particularly tends to be girls, where very early on they learn just to sort of blend in. So yeah, I've got two more key ideas. First one, gifted learners are intense. Second one, exceptional. And exceptional, I don't mean as a value judgment, although they're wonderful. You know, all of our kids are exceptional in some ways. But this idea that you're really looking at the extremes. So when I asked my students yesterday, you know, what might this mean and what might it be a graph of and what do you think? We talked about it as height, so the idea that this is frequency, and this is the average here, the mean, and this is an average height person. And the average height person doesn't have to duck their head to get through a door. They can reach the door handle, they can sit comfortably because they're the average height. The world is built for them, really, you know. Someone at the other end, at the exceptional end, who is just exceptionally short, can't reach the door handle, can't be comfortable at the seat and the table, you know, really inconvenient actually. And someone who is exceptionally tall is going to be bumping their head on the low ceilings and through the doorways and such. And you might say, well, that exceptionally tall person, they can just duck, right? they can blend in a bit more. But at either extreme, you have sort of often medical complications as well. And we say, well, what do they have in common, those exceptionalities? Well, they kind of stand out. They're going to feel quite different. They might be bullied. And they both might not want to go to school, you know. And so I started talking about, well, yeah, okay, this is kind of true as well for that intellectual aptitude or way of thinking or way of experiencing the world, where the majority, the mainstream classroom is this. It's the majority of kids. Most kids, most of the time, mainstream classroom, their experience, they're being catered for quite easily. And as teachers in New Zealand, I think we work really hard. We do our very best to be inclusive and to stretch the curriculum and extend and enrich and to help those who are struggling. But the further you get away from this norm, the harder that gets. And it does get to a point where you can't do it in a mainstream classroom anymore. And that's kind of what mods is about. You know, when you're talking about the extremely profoundly gifted, we've got in New Zealand, there's a 16-year-old who's just finished his BSc and is getting into postgrad now. You know, his friends who are his age are just doing NCEA. That's not something that a regular teacher in a regular classroom can manage without support. And so my role here at St Mark's is kind of provide that support. And also that reminds me that all teachers, whether they know it or not, are actually teachers of gifted learners. Whether they are aware of it, gifted learners are out there. Whether they're those quiet underachievers, whether they're the, oh my goodness, please just stop asking questions, give someone else a turn, you know. But for me, I love working with these children. I just think that they're amazing. And we talked about, well, what kinds of different ways can you be exceptional in? And this might kind of speak to your question, Lauren, about sort of emotional intelligence. I think there's still probably a bit of a myth out there that, or perhaps like a stereotype of someone who's academically very capable and just has no social skills. Yeah, so is that still kind of an idea that's out there? But actually, that's one way you can be exceptional. So the ministry has been talking to Tracy Riley from Massey, and they suggest, you know, here are some of the broad kinds of categories. Could be social leadership. And that's something I think St Mark's School is just increasingly committed to bringing out in our apoa, you know, year 8 leaders, genuine, authentic leadership. But these kids who, and the rest of the class will know, the peers will tell you, oh, do you want someone to organise someone? Oh, tell them, they'll get everyone to do it, you know. Or the initiative to care, the person who notices, oh, she's feeling really left out, being really caring and kind and social, that can be a kind of giftedness. An example of this would be someone like Malala Yousafzai, you know, just exceptional care and power and efficacy in leadership. Creativity as in problem solving. So we have some young engineers here at St Mark's School who've got the 3D printer cranking and doing all kinds of things. Expression in the arts. So this could be dance or all of the creative things we think of in the arts. Intellectual academic, culture specific abilities and qualities. So things like whai kōrero, or thinking about what's valued by different cultures is what they will think is giftedness. And there is a history in the literature of giftedness being very sort of Eurocentric, and it's, you know, the man who gets the Nobel Prize for science, some sort of, but what is valued by other cultures? And for me, that's something that I'm still learning about, and I'm really grateful that you're all here, because we all have our own cultural background, we all have our own expertise, and you sharing that will help shape what St Mark's School defines as gifted moving forward, you know? So we talk about what does it mean to be gifted in Te Ao Māori and succeeding as Māori? Well, maybe that individual is not actually wanting to stand out. That's a bit whakarihi. I'm not going to be boastful and be, you know, maybe I'm really successful in this setting with this group in this way, and not just for Māori, but also for others to see, oh, that's another way that you can be exceptional. Maybe I can become a really powerful speaker and whai kōrero and have that. Physical sport, not really my sort of thing, to be honest. And to me that really highlights, and probably the arts as well, that as a specialist teacher of gifted education, I am not a specialist in all of these things. You know, we've got kids at St Mark's who are competing in gymnastics, athletics, dance at a national level, and they haven't got there because, certainly not because of me or their mainstream classroom teachers, although we might sort of support along the way. When we're looking at all these different exceptionalities, they're going to need sort of some mentoring, some guidance, some coaching, some expert help. So if any of you have a particular passion or interest or profession where you might be interested in contributing, that would be really cool. Yeah, and this is my last point. So my first key idea was gifted learners are intense, really full on. Second one, those exceptionalities, which come in sort of different mixtures. And this idea that gifted learners are at risk. So if I come back to the analogy of the exceptionally short, the exceptionally tall, I think in our education system and internationally, we do a lot. We try our hardest to help the students who can't reach the door handle, you know. We have schools that are full-time schools for kids with learning disabilities or differences where the mainstream classroom isn't for them. And we have RTLBs and we have funding for this and that. But it's just starting to happen, I think, in New Zealand and around the world, that we're realising at this end, they also need support. Because if I come back to that analogy, what did they say? They said both ends can feel left out, both ends can be kind of conspicuous, can be bullied, don't want to come to school. They're not learning. That's the main thing, you know. Every child has the right to go to school every day and learn something new. And if they're not learning something new because it's too easy, in a way that's just as bad as they're not learning something new because it's too hard. And we have to find out what those barriers are and do something about it. So this is where modified one-day school comes in. This is what I do on a Monday. It has been a pilot program. It still kind of is a pilot. Last year I spent the whole year every Monday with a group of year 6 to 8s who were nominated by teachers, and we just had the best time. It was incredible. You know, just putting them in a room together was honestly most of the magic. You know, I was just kind of along for the ride, because suddenly they could talk as fast as they wanted and share their ideas and be themselves and feel like, oh, I get this and I can ask this question and no one's going to make fun of me because it's the 100th question that I've asked today. So the standard I'm kind of working towards now is these 3 questions from academic by the name of George. I'm assuming that's the last name, I don't know the first name. What do all children want to be involved in such learning experiences? Could all children participate in such learning experiences? Should all children be expected to succeed in such learning experiences? And the suggestion is if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then you're not really meeting the needs of the gifted learners, because you should be offering something that is so much catered to them that actually other kids probably wouldn't want to do that. They certainly couldn't do it at that level, and that they shouldn't be expected to. So last year was a lot of fun, to be honest, in relationship building, maybe sometimes a bit too much fun, but this year certainly is more about cranking up the academic rigour, not just academic but also bringing out those exceptionalities. So it does have that talent development side to it, but that's not the be all and end all. And I probably should also mention getting into mods or not is a process that we're figuring out in terms of how do we identify these kids, how do we work with families, how do we know who's going to benefit most and who maybe it's not such a good fit for. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that even if they're not in mods, if you think of that continuum, the kids are sort of mildly gifted, we do also have extension groups and differentiation in the class and things like the Kiwi tests or Canton Math or other opportunities. It's not a either you're in or you're out sort of a thing. It's just this is that particular end of the spectrum. So yeah, that's it from me.